This is history gold, Tim.
History gold.
You're going to love this. You're going to love this.
I can't wait.
An amazing sight.
It's not a cemetery, is it?
No, it's not a cemetery, no. I'm just going to
castle?
photograph or two here, Tim. Can you hear the ripple, Tim, of history?
Well, what?
The River Boyne.
It's just a river.
It's the Boyne.
It's just a river.
That's where the battle happened.
You brought me here to see a river.
The most historic river in Ireland.
The long and the short of it, where a 6'4" comedian from a nationalist background, that's me, argues about Irish history with a vertically challenged Orange man, that's David Hume. Every year on the 12th of July, thousands of Orange men and Protestants in Ireland celebrate the victory of King William over King James at the Battle of the Boyne. And then there's people like me who don't. Now, David's going to say that they're celebrating the overthrow of an absolutist monarch and that William's victory at the Boyne was crucial to securing civil and religious liberty for Britain. Maybe. But in Ireland, I think things worked out differently. Am I wrong? And is David right? Should we all be celebrating the Battle of the Boyne?
It's been presented to us in Ireland generally and in Ulster in particular as a triumph of Protestantism over Catholicism, which it wasn't.
A mass is held in Dublin the day afterwards, both in Christchurch and throughout the city. All religions basically start ringing the bells for the victory at the Boyne.
David, I have to be honest with you, mate. I have never seen you so excited or animated in your life. You're here on the River Boyne.
Great. It's great.
It's great up to a point. But look, here's the premise of the programme. Should we all be celebrating the Battle of the Boyne? And let me be frank with you. Not much in it for us, is it, like for the Teagues? I mean, what is it? Why should I be celebrating the Battle of the Boyne?
It was so significant, that's why. That's why it's very, very significant, very historic.
It's the only time where William, the new king, faces James, the deposed king. That's why it resonates so greatly in history, is that big political battle of the war.
King James II, the one beaten by King William, had ruled over the kingdoms of Scotland, England and Ireland. His father, Charles I, had fought the English Civil War and been beheaded for his trouble. James and his elder brother Charles had wisely fled to the continent.
In 1660, he comes back to England after the restoration of his brother Charles, and he creates quite a bit of controversy when he marries a commoner, Anne Hyde.
James had two children with Anne Hyde, Mary and Anne. Mary would play an important part in James's downfall.
He also, I think, shocks people by converting to Catholicism in the late 1660s. When Charles dies in 1685, then James succeeds and becomes the Catholic king of England, Scotland and Ireland.
James was the first Catholic English monarch in 150 years, the last one being Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary. Yeah, Catholic monarchs didn't have a great reputation in Protestant England, and James's behaviour didn't exactly enhance that image. To make matters worse, James appointed the Earl of Tyrconnell, a Catholic hardliner, as his viceroy in Ireland.
Tyrconnell was a man with a mission, and that was to restore the Irish Catholics to their position in the sun. They got back into the army, they got back into the judiciary, and even the clergy, the Catholic clergy to some extent, enjoyed a period of rehabilitation. But what they really wanted was to recover their land that they had lost, especially in the post-Cromwellian Lamb settlement a generation earlier.
As far as Protestant England was concerned, the only good thing about James was his age, and that his second marriage to Mary of Modena was childless. His eldest daughter Mary, a staunch Protestant, was next in line to inherit the throne. All England had to do was to wait for James to pop his clogs. But then in 1688, James threw a very large spanner in the works by having a son, James Francis Edward Stuart.
There was total panic in the English Parliament that the succession was going to be Catholic, and they just simply couldn't tolerate it.
A small group of aristocrats and prominent parliamentarians decided to invite William, Prince of Orange, Stadtholder of Holland, to invade England. But what did a Dutch geezer have to do with it? Well, handily, he just happened to be married to James's daughter Mary. Honestly, he takes your daughter, then he takes your throne.
England has forgotten the fact that England was successfully invaded by the Dutch in 1688.
He just arrives in Torbay with a large army and he's welcomed. There's no fighting in England.
Well, James was left with no option because he's got this powerful army, and all of a sudden he discovers that his main general, John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, has changed sides. A lot of the army changes sides.
So James legged it to France, and William and Mary were invited to become King and Queen of England in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. David Hume and the Orange Order revered this as a key milestone in the establishment of British constitutional democracy. We met Dr. Jonathan Madison at the Museum of Orange Heritage, and he was eager to tell us all about it, providing that we all wore gloves.
If you drill down and see what's being celebrated, that aspect of freedom of the press, trial by jury, the freedom of the individual, constitutional monarchy, it was about changing the balance of power from one person to that of the people in the form of Parliament. And that's why the Glorious Revolution is hugely important, and the events like the Siege of Londonderry, the Battle of the Boyne, the Battle of Aughrim become integral to that.
One of the things that in the Whig version of history that we are told is that William was the man who brought in the Bill of Rights. William was the man who was responsible for the king in Parliament. He wasn't. He was forced to accept those things by the people who had brought him in. A group of Tories and Whigs, both sides together, 7 men in total, who had brought William with an invading army to England.
Whatever your view on the matter, England had a brand new Queen and King. But who was William III?
He's a Dutchman. His first languages would have been French and German. He hardly would have spoken the English language. Also, when it came to religion, he was a man who really promoted religious toleration. In other words, he wasn't a Protestant bigot.
Even more shockingly, it turns out all those mural painters made a terrible mistake.
He would have been a big target on the battles like the Boyne if he'd been riding a white horse.
Right, so the gable walls are all wrong.
It's a celebratory thing so that we can remember him and the victories he achieved.
Celebrate the Battle of the Boyne? I think not. I mean, if you can't even get the colour of a man's horse right.
When we think of William of Orange, we think of this great strapping man on a white horse, when in fact he was quite a small man. He was only about 5'6". He'd had smallpox as a child, so his face was very disfigured. He had a slight hump back.
Becoming King of England probably had its pluses, but William's move to take over England was motivated by other considerations.
His main aim, even in taking the throne of England, really is to counteract Louis XIV, who really is demonstrating expansionist ambitions in Europe. And William's at the head of a European alliance to try and prevent this happening.
The money that paid for his fleet coming to England all came from a group of Italian bankers. Prominent among them were a couple of uncles and the brother of Pope Innocent XI.
So you need to play that bit up. You see on the 12th, about the Pope, you need to have the banners. Why is he not on the arches then? The Pope doing a wee bit of that there.
England falling under the control of William was anathema to Louis XIV, and he wouldn't let things lie. So within a few months, he had sent James to Ireland in an attempt to regain his throne.
The interesting thing about Ireland is that the principal actors there in terms of the 3 kings, so William, James and Louis XIV of France, none of them really view Ireland as centre stage, let's say, in this conflict. For James, Ireland is a route back to England and Scotland.
It's sometimes perceived by people who don't know this as basically Protestants versus Catholics, but it was a European war. There were more...
It was 3 things. It was a war as to who would be the King of England. It was a war against Louis XIV, or for Louis XIV, who was the dominant power in Europe. And it was also a war as to who was going to be the dominant power in Ireland, the older Catholic population and the new immigrants who were either Anglicans or Presbyterians. And the issue for the Irish, if you like, was which group was going to be dominant. And so in that respect, it was very much an Irish war.
William sends the Duke of Schomberg to Ireland ahead of him in August 1689 with a significant army. But Schomberg and his troops don't really achieve much. But William does eventually. He's moved by Parliament in England to actually intervene personally in the conflict.
So, David, your hero, King Billy, arrives here at Carrickfergus on the 14th of June, 1690. And do you know how I know that?
That's impressive.
It's written down there.
No,
anyway,
right,
but
okay.
he comes here a couple of weeks before the Battle of the Boyne, but he doesn't want to be here at all. Well, your hero, the man you love and you march every 12th of July, he doesn't want to be in Ireland.
When William has arrived in Ireland, he writes to the Duke of Bavaria and says, I'm embarrassed that I have to be here.
Right.
He's looking well. Is that the actual height of him, by the way?
Yes, it's a life-size statue.
He's not a big lad, is he?
He was quite small.
Yep. If he came back to life, he could be a co-presenter on this show.
Well,
Having landed at Carrick, William moved a few miles south and set up camp at the White House. Not the one in Washington, the one in Newton Abbey, which nowadays is kind of grey.
So Rob, King Billy arrives here in June 1690. He arrives in Carrickfergus.
Yep.
He looks at his statue and goes, "That's a great statue of me." I'll go.
He has his Dutch Blue Guard bodyguards with him. They're like the SAS of the time. William's a Protestant. These guys, you had to be over 6 feet tall and you had to be a Catholic. And that was his bodyguard.
I would have been all right then. I could have been in King Billy's guard.
You could have been a sergeant.
A sergeant, a general, obviously.
Sorry, man.
well, Tim, here we are.
So King Billy was actually here.
He was here in this building, inside these walls.
David, he left his hat. Have a go.
Oh. Well, if you want to get ahead.
That suits you.
Do you think so?
Oh, yeah. We're long and the short of it goes Lucy Worsley. He's not a very hoppy-choppy. What's wrong with him?
He's had to travel from England to here. Schomberg has been summoned to meet him here. Schomberg is military campaign manager for the whole of Ireland. Hasn't fought a battle in months and lost thousands of troops. He's going to lose the whole war for William.
Schomberg, I know something about Schomberg.
You do,
The
yes.
Orange Order
House
headquarters is called Schomberg House. So he was an idiot and he was stupid.
no.
He wasn't
Well, I
like,
wouldn't say he was an idiot.
No, I
He
wouldn't
was
think we would
quite
say that.
elderly and he had maybe taken a decision to quarter his troops for the winter rather than fighting on. And he redeemed himself. He was killed at the Battle of the Boyne.
Oh, he redeemed himself by dying.
Yes,
well done.
he gave it a full effort and done his best at the Battle of the Boyne.
After assembling his troops, William started to march south towards Dublin.
He marched from here down to the Boyne then. Well, marched where he's on his horse, presumably.
Well, I think they still had the Boyne Bridge at that time, so he might have marched over the Boyne Bridge.
How did he get past the falls?
I think he was rerouted.
He was.
James then readies his troops. They encamp on the south bank of the River Boyne near Oldbridge.
James chooses the ground of the Boyne. He calls it indifferent good.
James should never have taken the field at the Boyne. He had an opportunity where he could have met the Williamites at the Moira Pass, that geographical area between Newry and Dundalk. Schomberg fears that is where they're going to meet the Jacobites, and there is relief that that's not where James makes his stand.
By the time James reaches the Boyne, he's a man aged 57. Now, 57 mightn't be old today, but in the early modern period, he was an old man.
James's actions at this stage in his reign suggest that he was already beginning to suffer from dementia.
He becomes fatalist and indecisive and cowardly.
Okay, I don't want you to get too excited about this.
Yes.
You could actually be standing where King William stood at Mellifont Abbey. They came here before the battle, the night before the battle, and the day before the battle. They all arrived here and they discussed the tactics for the next day and what the strategy would be for the battle. So,
Right, so King Billy himself wandered round here.
He did,
Schomberg
yes.
is Major General, and they basically planned the day before the Battle of the Boyne.
Yeah, they
were
talked
here.
about the tactics. Yes, they were. And the good thing about William being here was he didn't have to worry about the height of this because he was quite small as well too.
His opportunity is to go for an enveloping action at the Boyne. James has boxed himself in. He has a ravine to his left. He has an impassable river with one bridge over the Nanny behind him. He has the Irish Sea in one flank, and he's put himself in a really difficult position. If William had been more daring, if he had even followed the suggestions of the rather ponderous Duke of Schomberg, he could have defeated the Jacobites in one fell swoop.
These are a pair of William's riding gauntlets.
Can I touch it?
You can, yes. You can lift it slightly, and you'll see those riding gauntlets that were worn by William, Prince of Orange, who became King William III.
Okay, obvious question. How much are they worth?
They're worth quite a bit, so we'll watch them as they're set down.
So his DNA is inside there somewhere, King?
In all likelihood, yes.
So the army of King James, also known as the Jacobites, met the army of King William, known as the Williamites, at the Boyne.
60,000 soldiers present on the battlefield, with camp followers by the thousand behind them, and with maybe 30,000 horses accompanying the armies. So it was a massive affair.
Some of the soldiers facing each other across the Boyne may have once belonged to the same regiment.
This belonged to a soldier in the Duke of York and Albany's regiment, and that was James II before he became king. But when the Glorious Revolution takes place, part of this regiment changed sides, and you'll see carved into the bottom of the blade near the hilt is William R. 1689 for the Revolution.
Oh wow, yeah.
So it was not uncommon for many of the regiments to actually split at this time. Some remained loyal to James II and would fight for the Jacobite cause. Others would go across and fight for William and Mary.
The Jacobite side have a decent cavalry, but their infantry is quite poor. It's made up largely of Irish peasants who are poorly trained, poorly armed.
James has got a fairly substantial French force. He's got 7,000 men under the Comte Lauzun. The only problem is that Lauzun has been given instructions by his political masters in France not to do much harm to his soldiers.
But the whole thing nearly didn't happen after William had a close shave with death the evening before the battle.
William wants to go out and see the lie of the land himself. So he goes out in a scouting party. The Jacobite gunners spy what they believe is a very significant target, and they start firing round shot. The small canister, a small shot about so big, bounces off the bank, catches him in the shoulder by the neck. He falls from his horse. It goes right round the Jacobite camp that William has been killed. In fact, it gets to London that William has been killed, so that Queen Mary actually thinks that William is dead.
There's an account of a Jacobite officer who was there on the day, and he said that lots of sociable material was brought into the camp to celebrate the death of the Prince of Orange.
What you're saying is that the Teagues got drunk the night before?
There were quite a few Jacobites might not have been ready at 7:30 in the morning to fight a battle that they had hoped would not take place.
The battle started when William sent a substantial detachment of his troops inland along the northern bank of the Boyne. James immediately responded to William's move.
When he heard in the early morning mist a big movement of troops going, which was a third eventually of the Williamite army, going upstream, he moved 2/3 of the smaller Jacobite army upstream to cover his flank.
Both of these large forces took no part in the fighting.
There is a ravine there, which essentially means that that entire Williamite and Jacobite force are out of the battle for the day, and James is left with maybe 1/3 of his army versus maybe half of the Williamite army staring each other down across the river at Oldbridge.
James is that side, Billy's this side. What's happening?
The crucial action is at Oldbridge, and it's where the Williamite army crosses, where the Dutch Blue Guards and others cross the river, get onto the other side. Jacobites try to repel them.
But although the Dutch Blue Guard had got across the Boyne, William could see that his regiment was up against it.
He sees them cut off on the enemy side of the southern bank, and he sees them being surrounded by cavalry. And now what normally happens in any kind of battle of this kind of nature, infantry against cavalry don't really have much of a chance. But what happens is the Dutch Blue Guard end up firing in 3 squares, platoon by platoon. And they actually halt the cavalry charges and force them to retreat.
And further downstream, more Williamite forces managed to make it across the Boyne.
The 3 Huguenot infantry battalions that crossed the river immediately after the Dutch Blue Guards, just a bit further downstream, they got hacked to pieces by the Jacobite cavalry that came in amongst them. Eventually, William himself came to the rescue, and he led the force of about perhaps 2,000 of his own cavalry and dragoons across the Boyne, and he was in the thick of the fight himself. And when he was engaged in hand-to-hand combat, one of the Enniskillener dragoons pointed his pistol at William, and he might have shot him, only William said, "You wouldn't shoot one of your friends, would you?"
Imagine, for posterity's sake, if you had been that Ulster Protestant who had accidentally killed William at the Battle of the Boyne.
William blossoms into this kind of proper heroic king. He's riding from one part of the battlefield to another part, urging his men on, in complete contrast to James. James is invisible at the Boyne.
Lauzun advises him, the time has come, Your Majesty, to leave the battlefield. So James then rides down and he crosses the bridge at Duleek, and the whole 2/3 of the Irish army that's up on that side follow suit and follow him. Meanwhile, the boys are retiring from up here, the Jacobites, especially the cavalry who've been fighting a great rearguard action to protect the infantry. They come galloping down the road from the east, and they encounter the main Jacobite army crossing the bridge at Duleek, coming down from the west side of the battlefield. Once the two sides bump into each other, chaos and disorder breaks out. They make their way across the bridge, but now the army is running for its life.
James later condemned his own forces, saying, you know, they all fled, but he was the first to flee.
He retreats to Dublin first, and there's a great, probably untrue story of him meeting Tyrconnell's wife at Dublin Castle, and of him telling her, "Oh, your countrymen, madam, can run well." And she replies, "Well, not quite so well as your majesty, for I see you've won the race."
He was much condemned by his own men who basically called him James the Shite.
Despite there being almost 60,000 soldiers on the battlefield, only around 2,000 men lost their lives. Most of them were Jacobite. However, most of King James's army actually escaped.
The reason that the Boyne is decisive is because James decides it's decisive. It's almost like he's willed this defeat into being, and he's willed the decisiveness of the battle to be more than it actually was.
But he then flees to Duncannon and away to France, and it does have a significant impact on the Jacobite campaign in Ireland to see the king fleeing.
You know, I'm very professional, and I obviously do lots of research for these
Oh
programs.
yes, absolutely.
Months in advance. You probably don't know this, but if some historians have now said that King James didn't actually flee the battle site, this is true.
Right.
And that what happened was with King William crossed the river in triumph, and he actually met King James,
Right.
who was sitting by a rock, bawling his eyes out. He was inconsolable, and he was crying and crying. And King Billy went up to him and says, "What's the matter with you?" And King James went, "What do you mean, what's the matter with me? I've just lost the Battle of the Boyne. My army's scattered. It's a disaster, disaster." And King Billy slapped him on the back and said, "Listen, James, never worry about it. See, in a couple of weeks, it'll all be forgotten."
The Boyne is celebrated by Orange men as a total victory for King William over King James. But in fact, the war dragged on.
When we speak about the Boyne being an important battle, it is in many ways, but it's not the end of the war. And it's interesting then that it has become, I suppose, this cultural touchstone. And even the idea that it's the 12th, so it's not the 12th. In the old style, it would have been the 1st of July, but even in the new style calendar, it would be the 11th of July. So in fact, the 12th references the Battle of Aughrim.
Over time, the Boyne and Aughrim have been conflated, and that's why we celebrate the Battle of the Boyne on the 12th of July.
So there's another reason not to celebrate the Battle of the Boyne. The Orange men have got the date wrong.
The real battle that finishes all hopes of Jacobitism in Ireland is the 12th of July 1691 at Aughrim. And Aughrim is famously known as the Aughrim of the Slaughter.
It was Aughrim that really sealed the fate of the Jacobites and really forced them to make a Treaty of Limerick with the Williamite forces.
Roughly 12,000 Jacobite soldiers are allowed to leave and go to France and serve ultimately in foreign armies there. And they take, of course, their families with them. That has obviously profound consequences for the Catholic elite in Ireland. They're essentially decimated.
The Treaty of Limerick, also known as the Broken Treaty, of course, because it was never enforced as King William had intended, would have granted effectively religious toleration to the Catholic population, which is what they had wanted and what the king himself actually wanted.
He had built a network of relationships between Catholic and Protestant in Europe. And I don't think he really kind of understood the idea of fracturing that when it came to ruling Great Britain and Ireland. The problem probably comes from the Irish Protestant mentality at the time.
The Protestant Parliament in Dublin just was having none of it.
One of the aspects of 1690 was that it reinforced Protestant power. The Protestants became on the winning side, and that meant that there was a control over power, which meant that Catholic freedoms were denied.
This leads then ultimately in 1695 to the introduction of the first penal law, and it's followed then by other penal legislation that targets Catholics.
So there was an ascendancy, defence of liberty, yes, but liberty which was on a lopsided basis in favour of Protestants for a long time.
It's important to remember that it was anybody who dissented to the established Church of Ireland was penalised. That was the Catholic population, the Quaker population, the French Huguenots, and of course the Presbyterians.
That's why you see a whole lot of Presbyterian exodus from Ireland at the first half of the 18th century.
Didn't bring in civil and religious liberty for all. It was basically brought about the Protestant ascendancy.
It starts the ball rolling for civil and religious liberty.
In 1736, a massive granite obelisk was erected on the banks of the Boyne to commemorate William's victory. At the time, it was the tallest obelisk in Europe and stood there until 1923, when it was blown up, probably by members of the Irish National Army. 2 centuries after the battle, nationalist resentment at perceived Protestant triumphalism still festered.
The whole concept of this programme is, should we all be celebrating the 12th of July? Is it something for people who are not purely Protestant? Let's be honest, you've a bit of a bad image on that front, haven't you?
At times, the optics have not been as positive as we would like them to be.
Euphemism of the year, thank you very much.
Ultimately, no, I don't think we should be out celebrating the 12th.
Given that the celebration by Unionists and Protestants of the Boyne is the celebration of a victory for Protestants over Catholics, there's no way that it's going to be equally seen with enthusiasm by people from the Catholic nationalist tradition.
Do you want to go on a march on the 12th with me and David?
Well, I think it's okay to commemorate battles. I don't think they should be celebrated, to be honest. Too much blood and, violence.
So should we all be celebrating the Battle of the Boyne? I'll leave it up to you. But I'll be in Bundoran.
What you're saying is I should march on the 12th then? I mean, I'm not allowed to march, but should I go along?
I think that's where you should be.
It's about celebrating who we are as a modern liberal democracy. And if you look at the American
But I can
War
do
of
that in
Independence,
Bundoran.
you reckon the War of Independence, the French Revolution, even elements of the United Irishmen all draw back to those principles that the Battle of the Boyne was key to.
It's important, though, to remember and to commemorate these events because they're so core to the identity of people living on the island, and to be very respectful of those who wish to celebrate it, those who wish to commemorate it, and those who wish to forget it altogether.
I would say, Tim, go out and celebrate the 12th and do it in the name of the Pope and one in the eye for the French.